Alina, and you're listening to Your PharmD Bestie. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Your PharmD Bestie. I'm joined here today by my friend, Joey Nguyen. I'll briefly introduce him in just a second, but just as a recap, the previous episode, I went over some tips and tricks on how to apply for pharmacy school and stand out as an applicant, as well as interview tips, etc. So if you have any comments or feedback on those episodes, feel free to drop them in our DMs, and I'll do my best to get back to those for you. So today I have Joey here. We're just going to go over some tips and tricks that we used to prepare for residency. So these are the months leading up to residency start and after graduating pharmacy school. Joey here is a current PGY1 in the AmCare and HIV program at UC Davis Health. He completed his PharmD at the University of Pacific in 2024. Joey, I'll let you introduce yourself further if you have anything you want to add.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me today, Alina. Nothing else for me to add. Let's get started for today.
All right. Well, I wanted to first off ask about your pharmacy school experience and what kind of motivated you to pursue a residency.
Yeah, so my pharmacy school experience at the University of Pacific, it's a accelerated program. It's a 3-year program. It's going to be 2 years of didactics on campus and then 1 year of the APPEs, or the Advanced Pharmacy Practice Experiences, which is in your last year. And then so basically the didactics portion in pharmacy school is a 6-semester length where each semester kind of covers a mix of pharmacology, OSCE practices, and also just basic pharmacy practice, like in the IV room, for example, a community setting, or an inpatient setting. And in your didactics portion, also too, you do some rotations during your didactic years. You do one either community, ambulatory care, and then lastly the hospital rotation. In terms of the final year for your APPE rotations, you can choose your location, whether it be in Northern California or in Southern California, and you complete around 9 months of rotations. There's a total of 6. We have 2 electives that we can choose from for any rotation: 1 mandatory community, 1 mandatory ambulatory care, 1 internal medicine, and then lastly just 1 hospital rotation. And then I think one of the main things that kind of motivated me to pursue residency is just that you're able to really practice your license at the highest level during residency. You're dealing with like drug-drug interactions, you're working with other interprofessional people like nurses, doctors. You really get to put your expertise of pharmacy, like your drugs and everything, to the highest level. And so that was one of the reasons why I also pursued residency. Whether it's acute care or ambulatory care, that really depends on like what you experienced during your time at pharmacy school. So one of the things I always recommend is just to always try everything first, and then eventually you'll find what you like, and then you can definitely pursue that specific career in residency.
Wow, you definitely know about your program, so it's definitely can tell that you probably have recruited so many people to your school to
Yeah.
study pharmacy. That's awesome. Do you think that being in an accelerated program allowed you enough time to explore everything that you wanted to?
I think for me, honestly, for with the accelerated program, I think my timeline where I kind of catered it to really be proactive, where I kind of sought for jobs really early on, whether it be like a community setting, hospital setting, where it may be. I just was really keen on getting a job early on. But I think in terms of like the time frame of the accelerated programs, it can be a little tough for sure, where it's like you only really have 2 years to really, build up your CV, and then your last year you're just on rotations. Whereas like 4-year programs, they have much more time to kind of build up their CV. They also have their summer off too. So they also have time to just do internships like out of state, for example, or other specific internships that are only in the summer. So sometimes the options may be limited, but I think it's also best just to really look around you and see what opportunities are there, and just definitely just apply for it.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I remember when I was in undergrad, I didn't know what I wanted to do until sophomore year. So if I were in that timeline that you were given, I would have been really stressed. So definitely kudos to you for being proactive and really trying to figure out what you wanted to do. And now you're in a really great program. Could you tell us a little bit more about the program that you're in and why you chose it?
Yeah, so my program is the Ambulatory Care HIV program here at UC Davis. And basically, our program kind of encompasses a lot of social determinants of health. So it's like dealing with transportation issues, dealing with stigma with medications, and mostly just dealing with the HIV population, also those who are unrepresented in Sacramento. So with our rotations and everything that we offer here at UC Davis, we work closely with a lot of the providers. Like for example, we have a lot of focus on like the hepatitis and HIV clinics, where we really work closely with the medical fellows, medical residents, and we really cater a whole plan together, with medicine and everything, just to make sure the patient gets the most quality of care. And you really practice, at your highest level, because you're, offering recommendations on the spot. You're answering drug information questions basically every single day. And a lot of the medical residents really go towards you first just to ask for any questions on meds too. I know during my residency here, like a lot of the medical students too, they always immediately run towards you to ask for questions. So it definitely makes you more prepared of anything like on the go, on the fly kind of thing. So residency here also is just great. We have a lot of great preceptors that really support your goals, and they really cater your overall kind of career path to make sure you have all you need to succeed after.
Awesome. I've always been curious, since I was part of UC Davis for a little bit of time as an AmCare and like HIV specialized resident. Like, what part of the program would you say like they do really well in terms of taking care of the HIV population?
Yeah, definitely. So, with our HIV program here, we do a lot of follow-up and a lot of outreach for our HIV population. Not just HIV too, we also have our PrEP population here in
Mhm.
Sacramento. So we really, go above and beyond basically just to help with the patients. Sometimes the doctors may have their own patients, they refer them to, the PrEP clinic, for example, or the HIV clinic, right? And so that kind of brings in those patients who we may not have any contact with initially, but they're able to kind of come out and really, bridge that gap with for healthcare, and we're able to really help them get the medicine and care they need. So that's one of the great parts about our program, where we really just kind of bridge that gap for them, and kind of offer like, kind of companionship in a way, where it's like they can definitely, rely on you for any advice, any medication help. And they know that they have a provider at like basically all times just to kind of talk to. So that's one of the great things about our program.
Mm, yeah, I definitely have to agree. Like my brief experiences with the AmCare and HIV populations at UC Davis. One, as a pharmacy student, when we were going through that part of infectious disease and didactics, I struggled so much with trying to connect with a patient when I was counseling them on like PrEP medication, as an example. And for listeners, PrEP stands for pre-prophylaxis. For patients who might think that they need prophylaxis against potentially getting HIV. So thank you for that little tidbit. I was just curious, so I wanted to hear more about that. So we're going to transition to talking about preparing for residency. Um, After you sent in your application, you interviewed, and you found out that you got accepted to a residency program, when did you start preparing for that?
I guess like in terms of like preparing for like residency, in a way, or preparing for after matching
Let let's go before. Yeah, sorry.
before.
Let's go before so we can do a
Okay.
chronological order. So
Yeah,
when
that
you're
sounds good.
preparing to apply for residency.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when you're preparing to apply residency, there's like a bunch of steps you definitely would want to take. I think one of the main important ones is to really start preparing like a document or like an Excel sheet of like the programs that interest you the most, right? So whether it be in California, for example, or out of state, definitely have like kind of a list of the programs you like. Definitely have your pros and cons, have the contact of like the RPD or RPC. And then as you kind of create your, Excel sheet of your programs, I think you should definitely prepare to really talk to the current residents. So look on their website, reach out to the emails you see there on the residents, ask if you can schedule like a Zoom invite meeting, quick out 30 minutes to an hour. I think once you get that planned out and you also start to meet the residents, I think it really paints this picture that, you're very on top of your stuff. You really have like this motivation to pursue residency. And a lot of residents really, remember faces a lot too, right? If they can connect a face to a name on their application, that just puts you way higher on their list to give you an interview. So always just definitely prepare for what programs you want, who to talk to. And then afterwards, once you start getting closer to like submitting your applications, you can start to like, put in the hospitals or sites that you prefer the most, and then kind of omit the ones that don't really align with your goals.
What were you looking for in a program specifically? Like, how did you figure out whether they aligned with your goals? Because I know when, for example, going to CSHP seminar or ASHP, like those big pharmacy conferences, there's so many residency programs being represented out there. Even like a 5-minute chat, sometimes I question if I really get the gist of what they are or what they represent.
Yeah, I think that's where, setting up your Zoom interviews with the residents, it
Mhm.
helps a lot too, right? You get way more kind of that one-on-one time with them to get more information about it. Because definitely during your pharmacy conferences, ASHP, CSHP, for example, they are just so packed with a lot of people and a lot of candidates. So it's really hard to kind of get your time in to ask your questions you need. And sometimes too, they might just give you a very generic answer that they've been answering the entire day. So they might not give you the quality answer you want. So having sometimes a Zoom interview gives you that advantage where they actually can take their time to really talk to you and give you the answer that you kind of want for your program and what you really look for. And I think also one thing to note too, in terms of like finding what really aligns with your goals, definitely look on their website and definitely do your research. Read their manuals, read the background information about their program, kind of learn more about it before you kind of go up and talk to them. So definitely prepare ahead of just finding their website and just the information they have there.
Mhm. Those are all very great tips. And usually when we talk to candidates, we also don't really want to hear like generic questions that you could read from the website. So just going onto the website beforehand can really give you that preparation to figure out what you want to ask and stand out in a more positive way. So when you were preparing for your application, this was when you were still in pharmacy school. How did you juggle that whole application process with all the stress and still like doing well in your rotations, classes, other commitments?
Yeah, that's definitely a great question because you're going to be super busy during this time. Like from August to December, it's been definitely like the peak stress period where it's like you're doing a lot of, responsibilities and everything too. I think one thing to know is just time management, right? I think, during rotations, you definitely want to finish your required tasks and your patient workups, your topic discussions, journal clubs. So definitely don't fall behind on that. But I
Mhm.
think, on the days that you don't have rotation, for example, like the weekend, or if they give you a day off, I think those times can definitely be kind of shifted towards working on your application. I think one thing to note too is that definitely just do a little bit each day. I think that's my recommendation where it's like you do like a small part of the forecast website basically each day, just so like you kind of, take a stab at it, like putting in your volunteer hours, putting in your work experience, because that can be a very time consuming process for sure, where you're just kind of putting things from your CV onto their website. So just doing a little bit each day, and then eventually once like, the application fully opens where you can add your programs in, you kind of already have everything set up, set in stone. So it's super easy and it saves a lot of time.
Mhm. Great tips. So similarly, I know there's a lot of stress that goes into the application process, but did you face any similar stress or anxiety going through the match process? What was that experience for you?
Yeah, I think, with the matching process, I think that whole kind of, journey there is super stressful because you're kind of just you finish your interviews and you're really just waiting for a program to kind of get back to you and match with you. So I think one way to really just deal with that stress and anxiety during that time is just to like kind of tell yourself that, you did your best, that you really just finished all your interviews, and now it's basically, what you rank and what they rank and what kind of matches up overall. So, just kind of letting it like just let go for a bit and just kind of decompress, be like, there's nothing I can do anymore in terms of like my end, right? And now it's on the site's end to kind of finalize their scoring and everything. And then, once match day comes, right, there could be, great news for some people, but then some people may not get the news that they want, right? And sometimes there's like the phase two portion, which, it's nothing wrong with phase two at all. I think that just gives you another chance to really prove yourself that, you belong in the residency program. And a lot of great programs, somehow end up in phase two. And so don't be discouraged if you don't match in phase one, because there's a lot of quality programs that make it to phase two. But then phase two is where it gets really difficult, where it's like a lot of fast paced kind of, back to back interviews where they really want to just get the candidate they want immediately. So that's like a totally different topic we can definitely cover too.
Yeah, I was actually kind of curious. Like, right now is about the time that I know some programs are starting to like review applications to send out like interview offers. How's that process been like now that you're on the other end versus when you were sitting and waiting for interview offers, as an example?
Yeah, on the other side, during this kind of period, like a lot of the programs are definitely just going to be reviewing all the packets. So they're going to go through every single thing, your LOI, for example, your CV, your letter of recommendations, and then depending on which program you do apply to, if they have like an additional like prompt due as well. So I think, once you kind of submit everything, right, basically each program has like their own review committee that kind of reviews all the applications. So every little detail actually matters. So, whether it's putting in a volunteer hours from your CV into the forecast, right, if you miss something small like that, right, that may dock you some points at some programs. So just making sure you take your time to really match up all your information. It's super important because a lot of the committees, they take the smallest detail to kind of differentiate between other individuals. And basically a lot of the timeline for like sending out interview invites, and also with like the emails too, like it's a very structured process. It's also very fast too. Like the moment the deadline kind of happens on forecasts, you should expect an email from any program really within the next week or so, just saying, hey, we would love to invite you out for an interview. And then you really have a short period of time to really prepare for them. So once you kind of submit your application, I think it's just best to really start studying up on your top topics: anticoagulation, infectious diseases, diabetes, for example, and just getting prepared for the invites that come out super quick.
Yeah. So what Joey was referring to, that latter part, in terms of preparation for like clinical questions during the interviews, it's good to kind of review that in case you get any interview offers that usually do require a clinical portion. And even some residency programs send out pre-screening offers that also ask some clinical questions, in case you're wondering about that. Great. Well, that's exciting to be sitting on the other side. Congratulations
Yeah.
again. For you personally, when you were ranking programs for the match process, what were some factors that were most important to you and how that affected how you ranked programs?
Yeah, I think the most important thing really, it's like you answer the question like, do you belong at this program, right? I think that's the
Mhm.
best question to really kind of tell yourself. Like, do they have what they offer? Like, do they offer a lot of precepting? Do they offer a specific like research project or topic that you're interested in, that isn't really offered anywhere else? Do they offer, very flexible rotation schedules, right? I think just a lot to look for, and it can really depend on anybody. But I think for me, some of the things I kind of looked out for, I didn't really put in geography too much in mind, but I definitely knew I wanted to be somewhere in California. So whether it be Northern California or Southern, it didn't really matter much to me. But I think other things I looked forward to is definitely teaching. I think teaching is definitely a big part of my career goals, where I'm able to teach like pharmacy students, for example. And so finding a program that really offers like a very structured, but also a very easy way to kind of transition from a pharmacy student to a resident and kind of learning how to precept. I think that was one of the big things I looked out for in my programs. And I think the last thing basically is just also location too sometimes, like besides geography, like does the area around the specific site, offer things that you enjoy? Maybe it's like your hobbies around there. It could be food as well too. It can be non-pharmacy based stuff too. So lots of things to consider, but it really just depends at the end of the day what you really prefer with that site.
Great tips. I also echo what you talked about in terms of factoring. I think geography and location was a little more important for me, but ultimately I chose where I felt like I could grow the most and where I felt like there was the most preceptor support and staff support, etc. So definitely lots of factors to consider when you're ranking. Okay, so we're gonna fast forward a little bit. You're stressed, match is over, you get the happy news. So how did you prepare yourself for that transition into residency?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think once you kind of see that match, it kind of hits you like, you're going to be a resident next year, and there's going to be a lot to kind of prepare for. But I think, first off, just definitely just treat yourself first. You definitely accomplish like a huge hurdle, right? So go out with your friends and family, just spend some time outside of pharmacy. And then, afterwards, after you kind of get back into like the rhythm of everything, definitely start preparing for your board exams. I think that's also a huge component to kind of start out early, just so that because once you get into residency, right, the time can be a little hard for you to kind of keep up with stuff too, with the projects and everything, and all the orientation process. So I think once you kind of get that, great email from, the match, just make sure, set a game plan for starting the boards, CBJE, for example, if you're practicing in California, and then the NAPLEX too, but having both those kind of game plans for those two exams to be completed, hopefully early on in your residency, just so that that stress isn't kind of carried on over throughout the residency process.
Yeah, I also definitely have to echo that. I think one thing that people don't realize once they get that news that they're going to be a resident next year is that certain institutions start earlier than others. And then you have to think about the institutional deadline for when you have to be licensed, because for those institutions that start earlier, they likely have an earlier deadline as well for you to be licensed. So definitely studying ahead of time when you can, but also making sure that you do give yourself that time to celebrate, because I think after 3-4 years of hard work in pharmacy school, like you definitely deserve it. Just as Joey mentioned, have a game plan on what you want to do after that. Looking back, is there anything that you wish that you would have done differently during the preparation process besides like maybe exam preparations?
Yeah, I think one thing I definitely could have improved on more is just setting up the Zoom invites with like
Mhm.
those current residents. I think also starting that earlier on too, just so that you can kind of get a glimpse of how they start applying for residency, what made them choose a specific hospital, and just reaching out to like basically everybody that you can find online for those sites and everything too. So I think that's why it's very important to figure out your sites that you're interested first. Just interest doesn't have to be exactly what you want your list, and then just start reaching out to residents and talking to them and just getting to know them a little more. And then you can definitely starting to filter out which one fits you or not.
So that's a great tip for applying for residency. Would you also recommend doing the same, or like maybe trying to visit that site in person beforehand to see like what residency life actually is at that site, like after you get the acceptance or whatnot?
Mhm. Yeah, I think, if the hospital that you're applying to or the site that you're applying to has that option to go in person to like do a kind of campus tour, for example,
Mhm.
I think you should definitely take up on that offer. Most of them are all free, and they just provide you information about what the hospital offers, the programs, the electives, for example, or rotations that they offer. And so take advantage of that too, and then just, go there. And also, you might be more familiar with like meeting the RPD or like an RPC of some program that might be hosting it. So that gives you an advantage of like kind of putting yourself out there, and they get to kind of connect your name to a face. So
Yeah, I definitely agree. I remember when I was interviewing for UC Davis, for the HS PAL program specifically, the interview was in person. So we showed up on campus, and I remember one of the people interviewing with me asked, like, where do people park? Because it's expensive parking at the hospital. And I thought that was like such a great question, because if I had not been a student on clinical rotations at Davis, I would not have known that, oh, maybe you could park in the neighborhoods nearby to save a couple of bucks. So just like things like
Yeah.
that too, like
Yeah.
I think it's great if you can have the opportunity to like meet up with maybe current residents at that institution, even after you've been accepted and you're like I've been accepted. What else can I do? I don't know. It could still build connections. So I thought that was a very fun question to to hear someone ask and also like know the answer myself at that point.
Yeah, and I think it's also great too just to like ask non-pharmacy questions. So I think a lot of, preceptors and RBCs really enjoy just like having a casual conversation when you're there too, because, sure it's a very tense period where you're kind of figuring out which program fits you best. But I think just like going along and like just enjoying the ride, basically just like, hey, this is what they offer. This is pretty interesting. Just getting to know the people there. I think that builds a more genuine connection with the program, and they can definitely see that too.
Hmm. Awesome. So we're kind of nearing the end of the episode. Um, my last two questions I had for you, I wanted to know what your best piece of advice would be if you could give someone who is preparing for pharmacy residency. So we'll start off with that one.
Ooh, the best piece of advice. That's gonna be a hard one, but I think for me, the best piece is just to always start early. I think once you're in your like third year or your second year of your pharmacy school, if you're in an accelerated program, I think that's when you start planning out like, okay, if am I going to residency, I need to figure out what programs it's like super interested in, right? So I think just starting out early, start crafting up your programs, the information you're gathering with them. And then once the process kind of starts, once you begin rotations, your advanced rotations for pharmacy school, I think that's when you really have to like have a set schedule on like doing meetups, doing your projects, doing your application, right? So time management is going to be your number one best friend during the application process, because a lot of the programs kind of close out their application by January 1st or 2nd, right? And you don't want to be the one where it's like January 2nd, it's like 8 p.m. and you haven't submitted your application yet, right? And then next thing you know, they change the due date or something, right? Of like the timing. And that could really just kind of flip it 180 for you and can make it really hard for you. So definitely time management is going to be your number one friend. Definitely plan everything out best you can. And then just go in strong and just get all the information you can from every program.
That leads to the second question that I had, which was how can students maintain their confidence and resilience throughout this process and even after they submit the application?
Yeah, I think maintaining the confidence and resilience can be a little hard too, especially like during the end of the application when you submit it and now you're just kind of waiting for interviews. And it can be stressful definitely when you're just waiting for those emails to kind of pop in like, oh, hey, you've been invited, right? And it's like, can be a very stressful time. But I think the one thing to always note is that, during your rotations, right, you did your best on the rotation and you also did your best too during the whole application process, right? You worked hard in your LOIs, you worked hard in your supplementals. And so it's just making sure that, you just prepare yourself mentally like, hey, I did my best, I submitted all my application process and everything. And, what comes after is, from my work. So I think one thing to note, just don't be too hard on yourself during this process, right? It's a very competitive, but also very stressful process. And so don't ever put yourself down. You are a strong candidate going into every single program. And so don't doubt your ability and your clinical knowledge.
Yeah, as I like to say, being Delulu is the best Salulu.
Yeah.
So
Or manifest too, manifesting the
manifesting
program is the best.
works. So
Yeah.
yeah, love that. Love that. Love that. All right. So, next segment of this episode, I did receive some questions from listeners after the last episode that was released recently with Valerie. I'm going to invite Joey to help answer some of these questions too. The first one was, what's the most common mistake applicants make and how can they avoid it?
Yeah, I think, there's two big ones I like to point out. I think the first one is that sometimes some applicants just may not, submit a supplemental for a program. And that could be really costly for your whole point average and everything. So I think when you look at a program, always double check every single tab, if possible. It may be tedious, but I think it's best just to double check every tab, double check your ASHP directory, making sure like, does this place have a supplemental? If it does, what's the word count? What's the topic? What's the prompt? You need to always double check every single program very, very carefully. And that also shows your attention to detail, right? If you're very careful, you'll see that they have a prompt. So that's also one big thing. I think the second big thing too, one of the biggest mistakes is that, oh, I have everything on my CV, therefore I'm not going to put it on the forecast portion, right? I think that also drops you a lot of points as well because it just kind of shows that you're not putting effort towards just something so simple. It may seem like a lazy aspect toward it, right? So it already gives the interviewer a huge picture on like how you are as a person. So I think always paying attention to detail. It may be super tedious just to kind of copy and paste everything over from your CV to the forecast application, but those small details 100% matter. So just make sure you kind of, tidy up those small details and make sure everything's complete, actually to 100% and there's no gaps anywhere else.
Great tips. I would like to echo that. And then just like right now, because we just went through another application period cycle, I've helped people look through their CVs and their LOIs as an example, their application. And one thing I want to point out too is on the CV, it's really important to keep it organized and very structured. Choose a format that looks good because as the person who's reviewing your application, like realistically, and this goes with CVs right now, we're in graduate school, you have a lot of experience. That thing could go pages long, but realistically, like who is going to read all of that? So definitely ask for tips on how long like a CV should be, like how you should format it so that you can reduce the length or make things more succinct. Because sometimes you write like sentences for bullet point to describe an experience and it's not actually necessary. So small things like that can help clean up your CV, make it look cleaner. And same thing with an LOI. The structure is important. I personally believe it's really a place for you to show your experiences and how that pushes you as the best candidate for the position. So what experiences are you going to bring to the table without making it too detailed or too simple? Those are also tips that you need to look out for.
Yeah, just to add on top of that too, I think for the LOI, you also be very specific to the program you apply to.
Mhm.
Definitely don't cast like a very general net across all programs because they can definitely see through that. Is there something super unique about the hospital that you're applying to that no other hospital has, right? So definitely do that research to dig deeper into finding those critical details to really add onto your LOI that align with your goals and also to the CV too. Make sure that it's very kind of organized, like Alina said, but also very simple. Don't overcomplicate it. Just keep it straight to the point. Like, this is my work experience. I have one, two, three here. And, there's like general rules of thumb that ASHP, I believe, offers for CV like review. And so, 3 bullet points per each point, making sure that, you have the dates correct, right? The preceptor, the site name, and everything. So, as long as everything's very consistent, that's the most important part about your CV is that consistency has to be the same throughout each section.
Definitely agree. And this is a little segue, but I'm planning to make some short videos just going over like my top 10 advice for CVs and LOIs later on. And so for listeners, if you're looking for tips and tricks on how to improve your CV and LOI, I will be releasing that as well as templates perhaps for you to use as a place to start. Next question, what tools or strategies helped you stay organized?
Yeah, so I think one of the tools that I use is definitely take advantage of the ASHP or the APHA resources for residency. There's like so many resources there. There's like how do you write an LOI, or some top interview questions that you may expect from residency. What is like the structure of an LOI? Like how do I make it split up? It's like my introduction, my body paragraphs, my conclusion. Like how do I do all that? And they also give you tips on like how to go through forecasts. Like, what does this word mean? Like volunteer experience versus like internship experience, or like paid experience or academic credit, right? So they give you a very detailed description of what each thing kind of means. So that can be a starting point to kind of figure out forecasts, figure out how all these terms mean. And when you submit it, like what are some ways I can submit it correctly and not having like a wrong application or wrong PDF file, for example, in the wrong program. So take advantage of APHA and ASHP to kind of really, set you to that like foundation of like your career path and like how to really organize everything before you submit your application. And then also one thing too to note, there's like a great CV website that I use called Flow CV. It basically gives you the opportunity to kind of have everything organized in the sections you want. They do all the titles for you, all the fonts for you. So it's like a very like easy, hands-on way to make your CV, just so that it doesn't have any inconsistencies with the formatting.
That's really cool. I did not know that. See, the more you know. I personally, I think for this process, outside of, like using resources to stay organized, also personally for me, like setting deadlines for myself. So I don't know if you're like an avid calendar user, but I use Google Calendar like daily as a ritual pretty much. So that definitely helped me stay organized. Definitely recommend it for listeners to utilize something like that, whether that's like Notion for you, to-do list, whatever works to stay organized and on top of what you need to do.
Yeah, I think for me, I use like Notion. I use like a to-do list that kind of gives you like a checklist at each
Hmm.
day, what to finish and what to complete. I think that also makes it easier too to also stay organized. You kind of have like a little way to show that you're finishing stuff on time each day. So whatever works for you really to kind of keep you organized and on track to really submit your application and also just to finish all your tasks.
Hmm. Awesome. Well, thank you for that. Last question from listeners. What advice do you have for current students to make the most out of their rotations and preparation for residency?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, the most important thing to do while you're on rotation is definitely just, being motivated to learn.
Hmm.
There's times where, you're gonna be staying late after rotation to like catch up on, notes to research a specific disease state or a topic. But just definitely just be motivated. Motivation is huge during rotations. Preceptors can definitely see that too, where it's like, oh, student A is very motivated to learn, despite having not too much background on this specific topic, whereas student B already knew a little bit about this topic, but they're not really trying as much. So most likely they'll just choose student A in that situation. So be motivated. Always ask to learn new things. Don't be afraid to ask to learn new things. It can be scary to like try something new that you've never done before, but I feel like learning something new is better than just doing what you're kind of doing right now, right? Always try new things like the most you can. Like, oh, how do I do this process on the Epic, for example, or how do I manage this specific disease state? Just always ask questions and always be eager to learn, and that makes you really stand out. And that also gives you a very strong letter of rec too from that preceptor for that rotation. So make the most of it by asking questions and just being curious.
Yeah, I definitely echo that. I don't think I have anything like specific that I want to add to that. I think definitely just being proactive and willing to learn. Yeah. So I hope you enjoyed Joey's answers to those questions. I encourage listeners to keep sending in more questions for future episodes because either me or our wonderful guests will have great answers to guide you along this process. So thank you again, Joey, for being my guest for this episode. I hope everyone learned a lot. Look out for the upcoming episodes. We will have some more discussion with some fellows and also other residents who are perhaps applying and have gotten into PGY too. So thanks for listening again, reminding you that if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, like, and leave some reviews. Follow us on social media. We'll see you again next time.